Let's now define linguicism. What's the linguicism now? I just pointed out some aspects of linguicism. Now let's have a clear definition, okay? What's linguicism? So we say the unfair treatment of an individual or community based on their use of language. Linguicism means the unfair treatment of an individual or community based on their use of language. Let me give you a relevant example, vivid example in our context, okay? So when you say, let's say you are the headmaster, headmaster. You tell your school children not to speak Swahili when they come to your office, okay? You tell your school children not to speak Swahili when they come to your office. This is a typical example of linguicism. When you are the headmaster, the headmistress somewhere, you say you don't have to speak your ethnic community languages when you are in the school environment, okay? This is an example, this is a typical example of linguicism. Because with linguicism, you are trying to have unfair treatment of an individual or community based on their use of language. So when you say Swahili should not be used as a medium of instruction in Tanzania because of your own beliefs, because of your own arguments, then this is a sort of what? Because you are not treating Swahili in a fair way. We said last time that Swahili is our national language, okay? Swahili is our national language. Why don't we treat Swahili fairly as a national language? Huh? I said when you go to countries like Japan, they have Japanese as their language, okay? But they treat Japanese fairly. They treat Japanese fairly because children in Japan are allowed to use Japanese as a medium what? Instruction. Now when it comes to Tanzania, children are not allowed to use their national language as a medium of instruction. Is that a fair treatment? Sir, is that a fair treatment? So our children are not treated fair when it comes to language. Huh? Now what? Our children treated fair? This is a treatment which is not fair. So this is a sort of what? Linguicism. The right concept. When you say, and linguicism does not simply include standard languages. Standard what? Languages. Because people can be segregated. People can be discriminated in terms of their dialect. In terms of their dialect. So when you talk about linguicism, we are not simply including standard languages. We are also including non-standard languages. Like I said, when you talk about English, English has different varieties. So we have standard British English, we have standard American English, but we also have other Englishes. As I want to see later, we have also other dialects of English. So when you say, for example, when you write your letter, let's say you are in the United States, you are coming from Texas, you are Afro-American, okay? So when you're Afro-American, you live in the United States, you can also be discriminated when it comes to the way you use your language, okay? So because they're going to ask you, they're going to ask about your language, about your dialect. You are American, yes, but which dialect of English do you use? Do you use Black English vernacular? Do you use standard American English? So when you write a letter applying for a job, you need to abide by standard American English. Standard American English. So when you write a letter using Black English vernacular, your letter can be discarded. And when your letter is discarded because you are using Black English vernacular, this is a sort of what? Linguistic. Because they are segregating you. They are excluding you They are discriminating you because of the language you use. So the language you are using is non-standard. It's not according to their standards. According to their... After all, who sets language standards? Who sets language standards? Ask your neighbor. Who sets language standards? Who sets language standards? For example, okay, let's talk about Tanzania. Hey, let's talk about Tanzania. In Tanzania, who sets language standards? We are talking about the Kiswahili. Who sets language standards in Tanzania about the Kiswahili? Who sets? For example, when you talk about France, in France we have a certain organ which sets standards, okay? This organ is known as l'Académie Française. L'Académie? The French Academy. So the French Academy in France sets French standards. So almost in every country there is a certain organ which sets language standards. So if your language doesn't fall, if your language doesn't fall within the standards that are set concerning a certain language, then you are going to be excluded. So BAKITA in Tanzania will say, okay, if you want to speak standard Swahili, you don't have to say maonyesho, because maonyesho is not standard Swahili. The standard version is what? Maonyesho. So when you write a letter with the spelling maonyesho, you can be penalized. You can be penalized. So when you penalize a person because of the language he or she has used, then that is linguicism. Okay? Yeah. So linguicism focuses on ideologies, structures, and the practices which are used to legitimate, effectuate, regulate, and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources. Linguicism, like I say, focuses on ideologies. Have you written that? Focuses on ideologies, structures, and practices which are used to legitimate, effectuate, regulate, and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources. Here we are talking about languages. We are talking about languages. Unequal division of power and resources between groups which are defined on the basis of language. Should I repeat that? I say linguicism focuses on ideologies, structures, and practices, okay, which are used to legitimate, effectuate, regulate, and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources between groups which are defined on the basis of language. On the basis of what? Language. Now, linguicism, like I say, linguicism can be used to legitimate. What do you mean by legitimating? Making something legal. Making something legal. To legitimate means to make something legal. To make something legal. Make something legit. to legitimate. Now, when we say we should accept standard British English and not Nigerian English. We are trying to legitimate one variety of English at the expense of another variety. When we say we need to accept British English and not American English, we are trying to legitimate British English at the expense of American English. That's what we mean by saying that linguicism can be used to legitimate a certain variety of language. It is a tool which is used to say that this is standard and this is not standard. That's what we mean by legitimating. Languages don't have a role to play when it comes to educational circles. You get the concept? So English has been legitimated at the expense of other local languages. So other local languages are not regarded as being important, as is the case with what? With English. So English has been legitimate. The inequality between languages is that English has an unimportant role. English has an important role. English has an unimportant status when it comes to educational circles because it is a legitimate language. It is a legitimate language. Are you getting my concept? Yeah, that's what I mean by linguicism. So, the concept of linguicism arose in comparison with the other more established isms. You know isms? Isms. You know isms? When we talk about isms, we are referring to ideologies. Because different ideologies end with ism. For example, isms. 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 When we talk about isms, we are referring to ideologies. You know, many ideologies are created, many ideologies are coined using isms. Isms is just a suffix, so for example, socialism, sexism, linguicism, nationalism, other isms, colonialism. Those are isms. Those are ideologies. Yeah, that's what we mean by isms, ideologies. So we say linguicism is the concept that arose in comparison with other more established isms, such as racism. Okay? Racism means what? Discrimination in terms of what? In terms of color. Sexism? Discrimination in terms of sex, In many countries, we are still talking about linguicism, okay? For example, in many countries, people who do not know English or do not know it well, you see, people who do not know English or do not know it well are stigmatized. I'm trying to give you an example of how linguicism can work, okay, in relation to English. So we say in many countries, people who do not know English or do not know it well are stigmatized.